Thank you very much. I just want to say a few words. First, I want to thank you for inviting me to this conference to have a chance to speak to you. Other than answering difficult questions, I would also like to hear your views on the issues that are close to your heart. I just came in from US just to give you a very quick update of my discussion in US. I went there with 4 key objectives. First is to have a first-hand information and assessment of the economy, how it's going, where it's moving towards, what's the outlook like, and secondly, to meet up with various congressmen from both parties to engage them, to share with them about Singapore, and thirdly, to meet up with the administration to discuss areas of collaboration, how we can deepen our cooperation to create more opportunities for us. And lastly, to also discuss issues relating to the tariff. On the first issue of economy, it's surprising that the US economy continues to be relatively resilient. When I meet many businessmen in the US as well as academicians, the feedback I get is that the economy outlook seems cautiously optimistic, maybe because of the big, beautiful bill that President Trump has just passed that has entrenched the tax cuts and the benefits and support for the businesses. So the outlook seems to be quite optimistic, albeit cautiously so. Secondly, at the same time, inflation seems to be muted, and they expect maybe one of the reasons is because the full impact of the tariff hasn't flown through yet. So they are still waiting to see whether costs will go up in the second half of the year. But so far, inflation seems to be moderated. So I think these are reasonably good news for the economy. And unemployment rate has also been stable, has not spiked up. So I think overall, most of the American businesses are cautiously optimistic about the future. Secondly, when I met the congressmen, several of them from both parties, I tried to impress on them the good relationship that Singapore has with the US, the long-term and deep engagement that we have, and particularly US has a trade surplus with Singapore, unlike many other countries. And we are also keen to continue to explore how we can work together with the US, and we hope the congressmen will continue to support Singapore's engagement with the US. And when I met the US administration, we also talked about cooperation between the two countries beyond just tariffs and beyond just investment and trade. We also discussed the cooperation in digital economy, in the climate change and sustainability in the green economy, and how we can continue to work together in many of these areas that have a potential for growth. And I also encourage them to continue to engage Asia, not just Singapore, but the larger Asia, because ASEAN, for example, is a fast-growing region and a very important economic region for the US. So I encourage them to continue to engage with us and to find ways to work together between US, Singapore, US, and ASEAN. And lastly, on tariffs, we discussed the tariff that the US has introduced since Liberation Day in April. And particularly, Singapore is subject to the minimum baseline tariff of 10%. So my first question to them is, can we negotiate on the 10%? Can we try to reduce it or eliminate the 10%? I think the answer for the time being was quite obvious. They are not in the mood to discuss any discount to the baseline tariff, which I think I shared with many of you earlier. But we also want to put a place marker to remind the US that at any point in time in future, if there's flexibility to discuss the baseline tariff, we are interested in negotiating on the baseline tariffs. So I think we just want to register our interests. At the same time, when we discuss with them, I think that US has mentioned several times the baseline tariff may be adjusted going forward. So we also wanted to know whether the baseline tariff will stay at 10% or will it be higher or lower? And the answer was non-committal, and they are still reviewing the tariff, and in time to come, they will make the appropriate announcement. So we'll just have to wait and see. I think there's significant uncertainties. I did not have a chance to meet the Secretary Lutnick and therefore we didn't go into details of negotiation on the pharmaceutical tariffs. And I think the administration's focus now is to finish the negotiation on reciprocal tariffs. So after that, then they will start to engage countries on specific sectoral tariffs like pharmaceuticals or semiconductors. So I think that, in a nutshell, is what I have engaged the US to discuss on. And generally, I think we continue to have very good working relationship between the US and Singapore, and we are happy to see that the US has completed negotiation with several countries and several groups, economic groups, including the EU, and I think this gives us a sense that there's a good progress in the tariff negotiation. But I also come back with a sense that there remains significant uncertainty. I'm not sure whether the uncertainty has really been eliminated or even reduced. Say, for example, to start with, despite the fact that they have completed negotiation with several countries, the details are not yet fully discussed or disclosed. And how, for example, the definition of rules of origin, how do you determine the rules of origin, the details are not out yet. And how to implement some of these tariffs, because it's very complicated to have different tariffs for different countries, and how do you deal with the inter-country transfers, transshipment, re-exports, remanufacturing, and value-added manufacturing, and so on. How do you account for the contribution, the components from different countries? The details have not been worked out, both in terms of definition as well as implementation. On top of that, there's also uncertainty as to the sectoral tariffs, and which has not been determined. And beyond the tariffs discussion, there's also the question of how countries will respond as a result of tariff negotiation. Let's say, for example, the EU has committed to make an investment of $550 billion over a period of time, and whether these investments will be new investments or whether they will be investments that will be diverted from investments into other countries is a question that we do not know yet. Japan has also committed investments into US, and Japan has been a major investor in Singapore. Whether the Japanese investment in Singapore will be diverted into US is a second question that is yet to be seen. So there are uncertainties as to how countries will respond to the outcome of the tariff and negotiation. Some countries have also committed to purchase more from US, and they would have been purchasing these products from other countries, whether now instead of purchasing from country A, country B, they will now purchase from US, and therefore exports from these countries to the affected countries will be changed. So I think these uncertainties, second derivative uncertainties that no one is paying much attention yet, because we need to have the tariffs settled, then we'll work out how the secondary impact will be. And then in the medium to longer term, there's also an issue of how the supply chain will be restructured. If countries who have investments in high tariff countries may decide to move their investments, to relocate their manufacturing plant to a lower tariff country so as to benefit from a lower tariff imposed by US. So this will result in shifts in the supply chain. And these shifts are another uncertainty that we are yet to see. The economics will have to be worked out based on the relative tariffs from different countries. But in the longer term, that's medium term, in the longer term, the concern and the uncertainty that we are facing really is how would this impact the overall global trading system, what we call the rules-based multilateral trading system, that we depend on rules, respecting trade agreements with one another, and not to change at will. It's something that has been challenged. Today we may agree with one another on certain tariffs, but tomorrow something happens, I will decide to change my tariff rate that I impose on you. And that is something that is very uncertain, and that has been seen over the last few months as you see tariffs being negotiated. We have a minimum baseline tariff of 10%, and it is at the risk of being adjusted going forward. And whether that will be the final tariff, no one can tell. So the uncertainty, in fact, over the last few months has been raised. It is something that we will need to recognize and to adjust ourselves and to respond to it. And I'll talk about response later on, otherwise I'll finish all the time that that we have.
So Singapore has this interesting position you take on geopolitics, that Singapore does not take sides, certainly in the US-China competition, but that you do defend principles. And so where are we now, 6 months into the second Trump presidency? Is it still possible for Singapore to avoid taking sides between certainly, say, US and China? And if your line is that you don't take sides because you defend principles, what is it like to defend principles in the second Trump administration? How is that working for Singapore?
Well, it's even putting President Trump aside, I think the environment is getting more challenging, more competitive as Singapore develops. I think the lower hanging fruits have all been plucked. I think we are getting into a situation where it's very competitive, and therefore it's important for us to continue to find ways and areas that Singapore can do well and continue to find ways to survive and to continue to progress. So I think Singapore, in the face of a contestation between China and US, we always say that we don't take sides, but in fact we always take sides. We always take the Singapore side. We always want to make sure that Singapore wins, and we always act in the interest of Singapore and Singaporeans. We always adopt principled approach, and this is important for us because then we are looked upon as a very consistent, reliable, and a trusted partner, because our decisions are always based on principles and always take into account Singapore's interests. And we always try to explain our position clearly, our principles clearly, so that our partners understand where we are coming from. So I think increasingly, of course, it will be challenging for us to continue to find a way forward, but it is something that we have been doing so and will continue to do so. What is important is for Singapore to also be nimble. I think that is one of our great value proposition, because we are small, we are compact, we work very closely with our workers, with our businesses, and that's why SBF is here. So we are happy to work very closely with them so that we can move very quickly. And in this uncertain world, as I mentioned just now, there's a lot of uncertainties, but that actually requires countries and economies to be able to respond very quickly to changes in the tariff environment, to changes in the supply chain, reorganization. Countries and economies that are able to move fast, I think, will be the winner. We say the same thing to our SBF and our businesses. Businesses that can move fast and adapt to the new landscape will be the one that will win. They will emerge as a winner. So I will encourage our businesses to adapt themselves, to be ready to move, to change, and the government will lean forward, our agencies will lean forward to support your adaptation to the new environment. And we also want to make sure that our workers are able to embrace the new realities very quickly, and that's why we will invest very heavily on the training and upgrading of our workforce to make sure that they're ready for the future. And that's why we have a scheme called Skills Future Scheme, to prepare our workers with the skills of the future, that are able to seize the opportunity that will come our way in time to come.
So one of the lines that I hear causing real concern in some of the other governments that I've been visiting in recent months around the world is, can we even take for granted the idea that America is focused on the competition with China above all else and is willing to, for example, pull out of Europe, certainly militarily, to focus all of its efforts on the Asia-Pacific, on the Indo-Pacific? Because I have been surprised by governments in this hemisphere saying, actually, we don't even know if that is true. Does Singapore have that occasional moments of doubt as you're not sure whether this pullback to focus on Asia is actually the precursor to America pulling back to Hawaii or to San Francisco?
You have to take a practical view, because the contestation between US and China is a reality, and they will continue to compete, continue to try to outdo each other. And I think that will last for a long time. But it doesn't mean that in between there will be periods of cooperation and collaboration and peaceful coexistence. And we are hoping that the relationship between the two, US and China, will be a stable one. Even while they compete with one another, it doesn't mean that they have to go all out to get at each other. So there is a possibility that both of them can find a way forward while they compete, but at the same time have a stable relationship. I think that's the best for the region, Asia-Pacific region, as well as for the rest of the world. And it is also not possible for the US to devote all its attention to China and neglect the rest of the world. I think the US is quite clear in its mind that China is their main competitor today, and they need to deal with China. But at the same time, they want to keep the rest of the world also engaged. And that is why this trip, when I was in the US, when I spoke to the administration secretaries, I reminded them that it's important to continue to engage Asia, because Asia is a very important part of the world, not just from an economic point of view, but from a security point of view, from geopolitics point of view. It's important for US to continue to be present and engaged in the Asia-Pacific region.
Are we going to see America just kind of pulling back to its own shores completely? Did you detect that in Washington?
Not really. I think when I was in Washington, when I talked to people, I think they are still very keen to continue to engage Europe and continue to do business and to partner Europe. But from time to time, I think the priority may be different, the focus may be different. Some priorities may be urgent and they have to pay attention to. But I think over the long term, both Europe and Asia continue to be a very important part of a US geopolitical strategy. And they do have an Indo-Pacific strategy that they want to engage Asia. And it is important for us to continue to provide that platform for US to engage with us.
You've mentioned uncertainty in so many different contexts. If I was a member of a board of a big multinational trying to decide whether to move a factory to America because of the pressure to move to America, if that's a 30, 40-year investment worth tens of billions of dollars, the incentive, the temptation to just kind of wait because there is so much uncertainty must be enormous. And so at least in the short term, is that kind of just the idea of drift and wasting a few years while we wait to see what happens with America, is that a specific short-term risk for a country like Singapore?
I think there is a risk for countries to adopt a wait-and-see attitude, and even for companies to adopt the same attitude, and you may miss out in many opportunities. The idea is that you can wait, but you should not be just see. You can wait and do, because it's important for us, while we wait for greater certainty, for more of the unknowns to be disclosed, to have greater knowledge. But you know that in the world today, you'll never have a perfect knowledge of everything. So you just have to continue to find ways to move forward in the absence of perfect knowledge, but based on what you know, make your calculations, make your judgment, and move forward. I think that's what business leaders will do. And the business leader will make the right judgment and the right calculation, and to make the specific moves all the time. As for example, for the government and for Singapore, there are certain things that we need to wait and see how it turns out, how it evolves. But at the same time, we are not wasting time. We are continuing to invest in our people, as I mentioned, upgrade our people, prepare them for the future, invest in AI. These are no regret moves. And we are continuing to expand our network of free trade agreements with more countries, with more regions. And we are also strengthening our partnership within ASEAN. We are deepening our integration. We just finished a negotiation on our upgrade to ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, ATIGA, and we are going to sign it later this year. And so hopefully we will continue to strengthen ASEAN integration. We are also exploring collaboration between ASEAN and EU, ASEAN and GCC. We are also strengthening partnership between CPTPP and EU. There are a lot of acronyms, but basically these are trading groups, and we are encouraging a collaboration between trading groups to see how we can move forward while we are waiting to see how the tariff landscape will pan out. At the same time, we are also exploring new areas of collaboration. Digital economy is one area that's very exciting. Despite uncertainty in tariffs, I think the potential for the digital economy is a very promising one, particularly in AI and in the digital payment systems and digital trading system. I think these are areas that are not competitive in nature, but facilitative in nature. So I think these are areas that I think many countries can still come together and to explore ways forward that we can work together despite the uncertainty in tariffs.
We have a gentleman here behind the microphone, and I'm going to take a couple of questions.
Matthew Ting from the Silent Foundation. When you approach this kind of negotiations, what kind of strategy do you take? Like, do you try to play hardball or more conciliatory? And how do you make your feelings known to the other party, without hurting them too much?
Asking me.
And we'll take one.
You're asking.
No. And then we'll take the lady at the lady
All right.
in the middle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gan Kim Yong. My name is Aiko from Catholic Junior College. So to echo what you have said, in light of US's ambiguous enforcement of transshipment and also unclear definition of rules of origin, so for example, we've seen shifts in supply chain, particularly in sectors like solar manufacturing in Batam. So how might this actually impact ASEAN countries, maybe in their exposure to retaliatory tariffs, but also in maintaining regional trade credibility? Thank you.
And we'll take one last question over there.
Thank you, DPM Gan, for negotiating. You look very tired. I hope you get some rest later. But for now, maybe I want to focus on absolute certainties. As you mentioned that tariffs still have massive uncertainties. I want to focus on one certainty, which is the big, beautiful bill and the effects of the US dollar. And how would that impact Singapore, and what are our strategies to mitigate the second-order effects? Thank you.
Thank you. So lots of...
Thank you very much. First, on a negotiating strategy and approach, that's our secret. I think it depends on specific situation and also depends on the other party, your counterpart. And depending on what is his interest, where he's coming from, the art of negotiation really is to know what he needs and what he can give, and to also understand what we need and what we can give. If we can give what he needs and he can give us what we need, that's perfect solution. But very often, what you need is what he doesn't want to give, and what he needs is what you don't want to give, and that's where the problem is. So really, the negotiation, you have to go through the process of discovery, of understanding where he's coming from, let him understand where we are coming from, and therefore we try to find common space so that we can have a common agreement. Sometimes in negotiation, you may arrive at some agreement, and you may also agree that certain areas that we cannot agree, and we just have to agree to disagree. So I think that's a process of discussion and negotiation. I think very often you find that bilateral negotiations is easier because it's just between you and me, and I know you, you know me, so we can find a solution. But when it comes to multilateral agreement, it's a lot more difficult when you have multi-parties involved, because then you have to make sure that everyone's interest is taken care of and everyone's concerns are addressed, and that's a lot more challenging. But having said that, I think at the end of the day, you still have to hopefully you are able to come up with a win-win situation. And in today's world, even win-win doesn't mean that both sides will win equally. Sometimes one side may win more, the other side may win less. But at the end, if both sides can have a winning outcome, I think at least you have a basis to move forward. If it is negotiating for a win-lose outcome, I think it's going to be very difficult. And therefore, when you go into a negotiation situation, from our point of view, first I will have to decide whether I have a win-win proposition that when I put it on the table, you will see that it will benefit you and it will also benefit Singapore. I think that you have a basis to start to negotiate, start to narrow the gaps between the demands from both sides, and hopefully you can have a win-win outcome on our negotiation. I hope that answers your question in principle, so I can't go into details on specifics. And on the second question on the rules of origin, thank you very much for the question. In fact, that is one of the uncertainty and one of the challenges that we have. And it's not just the definition, And however you define rules of origin, the enforcement is another challenge because you have to be able to trace where the origin comes from and verify where it comes from. Let's say, for example, if I buy something from Malaysia, I can say that under my rules of origin, the product's origin is Malaysia. But it doesn't mean that the product is produced in Malaysia. It may be produced in somewhere else, like in Thailand. So therefore, under rules of origin, it should be Thailand. But it is very difficult for me to find out where Malaysia has acquired the product from. So the rules of origin, how it is defined, is very different from country to country. And therefore, between US and the trading partners, we have to sit down and determine and decide how rules of origin is defined. Having defined that, we have to figure out how to enforce, how to track the rules of origin so that it is effective. So I think those are the uncertainties that we have to work through, and you're right that it will have an impact on the intra-ASEAN trade, because whether rules of origin applies, whether therefore you pay a lower tariff or higher tariff depending on how the rules of origin will apply to your product is something that is yet to be clarified. So I think we just have to wait and see how the outcome of the disclosure from announcement from the US. And the last question on the big and beautiful bill. So I think if I know the ultimate impact on US dollars, I will be a billionaire. The question is, I think it's very difficult to predict how it will impact on businesses and the US dollar, the currency. But I would say that the objective of the bill is really to institutionalize the tax incentives that was announced during President Trump's first term. And this, by introducing this bill, it will institutionalize these tax incentives, and this will give investors more confidence that these tax incentives will last for many years, and it's not just from year to year. So I think that will give confidence in the investors to invest in the US, then that will go towards President Trump's onshoring strategy to bring back to US many of the manufacturing investments. So I think that will be the immediate impact on investment and on businesses, and that of course will then have a consequential impact on the exchange rates. Prof.
Welcome back from Washington. You don't look tired, you look very well.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about two sectors which are very important to our economy, pharmaceutical and semiconductor. Can you confirm that you didn't have an opportunity to engage the US administration on these two sectors?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I did not have a chance to discuss pharma and semiconductor during this trip. We did have a discussion on the pharmaceuticals earlier on, and officials are continuing to discuss on the pharmaceuticals, on the collaboration between US and Singapore on pharmaceuticals. That's at the official level. I didn't have a chance to speak to the secretary on this specifically. Semiconductor, we have not started discussing on semiconductor with regard to the tariff. With regard to access to AI chips and so on, we have discussion on how we can make sure that we will continue to have access to the AI equipment and semiconductors where necessary. So I think this is something that we have discussed, but not specifically on the tariff on the semiconductors.
As you celebrate SG60, how does Singapore ensure sustainable and inclusive growth for the next 60 years? How do we make things happen instead of watching things happen? And how do you, or if you don't know what is going to happen to you?
This is a very interesting phrase. I used that during one of my parliamentary speeches. I said there are three types of people. One who knows what's happening, one that doesn't know what's happening, and there's a third one that don't know what hits him. So I think it's important for us to always be able to know what's happening, monitor carefully so that we can continue to develop good policy to support our growth and our progress moving forward. And that is why we set up the CERT Task Force, the Singapore Economic Resilience Task Force. One of the first work stream on the task force is really to monitor the development, to make sense of the information that's coming through, because every morning you wake up, there's always new news about the tariff, about the negotiation, how to make sense of all of them so that we are in the know. We are able to help our economy, our businesses, to make changes that may be necessary, to adapt to the new reality, and to move forward and to continue to do well. And that is why this is an important part of the CERT Task Force function. And therefore, I think even as we celebrate the SG60, it's important for us to learn from our experience over the last 60 years, the challenges that we've gone through and how we have been able to overcome them, to learn from the mistakes that we have made. I'm sure we have made mistakes as well. And for example, our COVID-19, what are the lessons that we can learn and how we can apply them to prepare ourselves for the future. So I think this is something that we will have to continue to work on and to learn. And how to make sure that our growth and development is sustainable and inclusive is something that I think is a new social compact that we have to develop, that we have to evolve together. And that's why we have this Forward Singapore conversation to discuss how we can move together, progress together as a society, as a nation, as a community, so that we leave no one behind, that our growth can continue to be sustainable and to be inclusive. But I must sound a word of caution that this is not something that's easily done. And it has to be, all of us have to be very conscious about this approach and this intention. We need to continue to re-examine our policies regularly, because as the situation changes, the policies that we have 10 years ago may no longer be relevant, may no longer be sustainable or inclusive. And therefore, we must be prepared to adjust, to adapt, and to change when the situation warrants it.
Frank Debets has a question which may come up on the screen. So he asks, is it even worthwhile pursuing a deal with the US which is likely to be shallow or narrow, possibly vague and uncertain, whether it's even going to be honored in the future? Well, what's the answer to that?
Can I ask, where is Frank? Okay. Can I ask, what are your views? I mean, this is a dialogue, right? So it cannot be, are you giving all the answers? Frank, I'm sure you have a view. What do you think?
Thanks, DPM. Yeah, as you know, I do like to ask devil's advocate questions. Honestly, I think it is worthwhile, because walking away from a negotiating table is never a good idea. But I do worry that the way, certainly it's reported in the press, that the countries that have signed a deal, that were first movers, like a UK or a Vietnam, the press reporting and even some of the officials are now saying, well, we're not sure whether this was really a good deal, whether maybe we rushed into something that wasn't worthwhile just to maybe be first past the post. So it's a really difficult question. I wouldn't have asked it if I knew the answer, if I had an answer. But I know from many conversations I have that a lot of people worry, you're a busy man. Is it really the best spend of your time on this?
Thank you very much. I think you more or less answer your own question. I think in a way, FTAs are very important for Singapore. We are a very, very small country, very small economy. Trade is 3 times our GDP. So trade is very critical to us, and therefore free trade agreements are important for us. Even with the US, when they have imposed a baseline tariff on Singapore, it is also important to bear in mind that if not for the free trade agreement, we may not have a baseline tariff, maybe something else. This is hypothetical, so it's very difficult to guess. But it is also important to bear in mind that the platform, the framework of FTA, is not just about tariff-free. It's not just about trade between the two countries. In the process of negotiating the free trade agreement, it actually deepens understanding between the two countries. We understand where your concerns are, you understand where our concerns are, and as we go through the FTA and as we implement the FTA, we build this trust and confidence in each other. So that is one reason why US today look at Singapore as a trusted partner, as a reliable partner, because we have honored our side of the bargain, our agreement on the FTA. And US, despite the FTA, has decided to impose a tariff on Singapore. And within the FTA, of course, you're supposed to have zero tariff both sides. But within the FTA, it has also provisions for tariffs to be imposed on certain reasons, on certain grounds. So I won't go into that details, but I think it's suffice to say that FTA has a value in strengthening the trade between the two countries and to also put us in a stronger position as we negotiate tariffs with the US. And it's also in the process of developing and implementing the FTA that strengthened the understanding between US and Singapore. And there are many things that we can work together. And because of our partnership in the FTA, that has allowed us to embark on other collaboration in whether it's digital, whether it's sustainability, climate change challenges, and so on. And as you know, we recently signed a 123 agreement with the US that has allowed us to have access to the civilian use of nuclear energy, knowledge, and technology in the US. So I think we hope that with this relationship, this trusted partnership, that will give us access to many of the technology that we will need in time to come. It's not just energy, and it's also R&D, innovation, AI capability, and many areas that we can work together as partners, both in the US as well as in Singapore and in this region.
Deputy Prime Minister, can I ask you to take that question and use it really to help us understand how do you see the logic of what the Trump administration is doing? And clearly, if you're trying to understand, as in your role, negotiating these deals, there's a certain incoherence. You have the tariffs are set high, and then you're told it's an invitation to cut deals and to lower the tariffs. But on the other hand, they don't want them to disappear because they're making revenues from the tariffs. And they also want the tariffs to be in place to bring jobs back to America. So it's certainly true that many different ambitions are going into the mix. But when you spend time with his officials, when you spend time with this administration, do you come away with the sense that actually there is a logic that ties all of these different moving parts together, however frustrating it must be to deal with it day to day?
I think there is a rationale on what the US is doing. Whether you agree or not, that's a separate issue. And if you look at it, there are actually three key considerations. First, if you look at the baseline tariff, it is fundamentally for purposes of generating revenue for the US administration, partly to fund the tax incentives for the companies and other expenses. So it's a revenue instrument for the US administration. That's for the baseline tariff. So every country basically pay the baseline, and on top of that, some countries will pay reciprocal tariffs. And the reciprocal tariffs really is an instrument that the administration uses to try to balance the trade. And therefore, the reciprocal tariffs is country-specific. If you have a huge trade deficit, trade surplus with the US, or US has a huge trade deficit with you, then they are likely to impose a higher reciprocal tariff to balance the trade, to discourage you from selling more to the US and to encourage you from buying more from the US. So I think that is to balance the trade between the two countries. Then the US has also a third interest to onshore, to bring back manufacturing into the US, particularly in the critical industries like semiconductor, pharmaceuticals, as we mentioned earlier. And this is done through the specific, product-specific sectoral tariffs. So it's not specific to specific countries, but specifically on certain products. Steel, aluminum, for example, they want to bring back some of the heavy industries to create jobs, and that's why they have a heavy tariff on steel, aluminum, and automobile. So there are three objectives: revenue, balancing the trade, as well as bringing investments.
This morning we heard a lot, as you would expect, about climate and the green transition. Under Biden, you had enormous subsidies on offer for green tech, tremendous opportunities to work with the Americans on green tech. You in Singapore, you don't have your own natural resources. You're very interested in going green, particularly as you power things like your digital future, AI. How do you put together, to add to the list of uncertainties, you need to go green, you want to work with the Americans, but suddenly with a change of government from Biden to Trump too, they're no longer at all interested in going green. So how does that factor into your relationship with America, but your desire to go green at the same time?
Well, I think amidst all the uncertainties, climate change is a certainty. And it is important for countries around the world to come together and to work together to solve this problem, because it's a wicked problem that is very difficult to solve. And despite our best efforts, we can only slow it down. It will not likely to be able to reverse course. I think many of the businesses that we talk to, despite the withdrawal of US from the Paris Agreement, they want to continue with their climate investments because they know that their customers demand it. And therefore, I think once the market is able to move, to change, and to focus on climate change, and to focus on green solutions, I think businesses will change. I think that is a more sustainable impetus. I think no amount of a government push will change. I think the consumer's push is the most effective in changing it. Having said that, I think it's still important for governments to come together, to work together, to find solutions together. And one example is the green energy, as you mentioned. Among the ASEAN members, different countries have a different profile. Some countries have excess green power. Some countries are in need of green energy. And if we are able to work together, I think we have a better balance. And that is why we revived the idea of an ASEAN integrated power grid. And this project is not a new one, as I mentioned many times. Actually, we formulated the project some 20, 25 years ago. There wasn't an impetus for us to push ahead with the project because there's no real need to connect up the entire ASEAN power grid. But now with the need for green energy, I think, and to achieve a better balance of a green energy source and supply and demand, I think this integrated power grid idea becomes a reality. It's a huge project. It will take many years to fully realize the project, and it probably has to be done in phases, in segments, not in one go. And that is a demonstration of how countries can work together to address sustainability issues rather than to work individually and to be isolated.
How do you see US tariffs affecting the pace and scale of the green transition?
I think tariffs as a whole, in general, from an economics point of view, will add cost to the entire economy. And that will slow down economic progress, economic growth, because higher costs will mean a lower demand, and therefore the economy overall will slow down. That's just a general impact of tariffs. And it's not just a US tariff, because countries will then may have to erect their own tariffs to protect their own market. Because if you have access from US products into your market, you need to protect your market against other imports, and therefore you may need to erect new tariffs. And overall, it may result in the rounds of tariff adjustments. And that will create cost to the economy. And once you slow down the demand, raise the cost, and slow down the growth of the economy, then you have less resources at hand for you to use for other applications like green solutions. So I think in a way, the tariffs will slow down the resources that will be available to tackle the climate change challenges. And on top of that, it may also specifically slow down specific industries that are related to climate change. So I think those in the longer term will mean that our efforts towards tackling the climate change solution will be affected.
So friction, but you have a plan to keep moving forwards.
But it's important for us, despite these challenges and uncertainties, I think there's still room for countries to come together, to work together, as I mentioned earlier, not just on climate change, but on economy, on the innovation, on R&D, on even new drug discovery, solutions to aging, for development of care solutions. So I think there are still a lot of opportunities for countries to come together, to work together, despite the challenges of tariffs being imposed on all the countries around the world.
Thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for your good questions.